Some are kissing mothers, and some are scolding mothers, but it is love just the same, and most mothers kiss and scold together. Pearl S. Buck. Chapter 9. When to Praise and When to Reprimand. Some positive thinkers have the idea that the only way to get people to produce is with positive reinforcement, but using praise is only one of many ways to motivate. We are complicated people, and we are nudged along by a host of complicated stimuli. At a seminar once I heard a motivational speaker say that there are only two ways to motivate people, either with love or fear, and the only effective one, he claimed, is love, all of which is a lot of reductionist nonsense. In the first place, we are motivated by many more things than love and fear, and in second place, fear is one rather effective way to bring out the best in people. Every day of our lives, we do things because we are motivated by fear. We avoid certain kinds of behavior at work to keep from losing our jobs. We strive at certain speeds because we fear the repercussions of doing otherwise. It is a folly even to hope for a world where we are not motivated by fear, and it is permissive foolishness to try to create a family where we do not use some punishment or an office where we do not reprimand employees. We ought to employ the carrot more than the stick, but the stick has its uses. Rule number 8, then, for bringing out the best in people is, employ a mixture of positive and negative reinforcement. When John Wooden arrived at UCLA, the basketball team had just ended a 12-13 losing season. He immediately set about building what became the most spectacular record in the college history of the sport. When Wooden retired in 1975, he had coached the UCLA basketball team to 10 national championships in 12 years, a record unapproached by any other coach. He was called the Wizard of Westwood because he could win with tall men and short men. Two research psychologists, Ronald G. Tharp and Ronald Gallimore, studied Wooden's coaching methods in some detail during his 1974-75 season. After watching 15 practice sessions to see how he talked to his players on the floor, they found that in contrast to the techniques advocated by many behavior modifiers, praise was a minor feature of Wooden's teaching methods. Total positive social reinforcements, verbal and nonverbal, constituted only 7% of his total action. Negative reinforcements added up to 14.6%. Wooden scolded twice as much as he rewarded. But the precision of Wooden's negative statements is important to note. The researchers called it scold instruction. That is, he would very often say, "Don't do it that way, do it this way." While he demonstrated the proper method, Wooden was never punitive or mean. He never used physical punishments, such as lap running, but at times his reproof could be withering. "I've been telling some of you for 3 years now to wind up where you throw the ball. Pass from the chest." Wooden's example can furnish us with several very specific suggestions about the use of negative reinforcement. 1. Be certain that you're teaching them to avoid certain behaviors, not to avoid you. Wooden always kept a warm, trusting relationship with his players and often told them that next to his own flesh and blood, they were closest to him. This made it possible for him to get away with so many corrections and scoldings on the playing floor. If our people go about their work constantly afraid of our wrath, they will not produce well. We will want our children, for instance, to fear the consequences of certain actions rather than fearing us. In an orderly and objective way, we can point out to a child that life is a series of choices and that certain choices can bring about certain results. Unsatisfactory grades can cause them to lose privileges, and certain behaviors get them restricted. It is an essential lesson for them to learn as early as possible. If you touch the hot burner, you get hurt, and if you turn in a poor report, you get the repercussions. This approach is vastly different from the tyrant. Certain leaders are unpredictable hotheads. If you happen to get on their wrong side, you're in trouble. They are vengeful and will do whatever is necessary to get back at you if you disappoint them. On the other hand, good motivators can be tough, but they are always fair, and they have your good and the good of the organization always before them. They do not waste time on vendettas. 2. Follow the undesired behavior with immediate correction. If there is any single fault in traditional punishing, it is that the punishment often follows the behavior by such a long period that it is ineffective in changing the behavior. In fact, some researchers want to distinguish between punishment, which comes after the event in the case of law, sometimes years after the event, and negative reinforcement, which comes immediately. Most studies indicate that when we punish people, we only suppress the behavior, and it is effective only when we are there to threaten more punishment. When we're gone, there's no danger of getting caught. The behavior returns. Contrast that with Wooden's technique. He scolded often, but he did it promptly enough that the behavior could change on the spot, and repetitiously using his scold reinstruction method, the behavior pattern changed. He was out to shape habits. 3. Establish a way to halt the negative stimulus as soon as the behavior stops. Let's say that your child brings home a bad report card. You respond withdrawing television for a month. A month is a long time and even longer until the next report card arrives, so the punishment is not very motivating now. And what happens if a worse report comes next time? Usually we don't say, punishment isn't working, let's try something else. Instead, we escalate the punishment, and this time we ground them longer. If threatening the employee doesn't work, dock their pay. If that doesn't work, suspend them. It becomes a vicious cycle and increasingly ineffective. As Victor Klein, in his book How Do You Make Your Child a Winner, says, taking the bike or car away for 30 days instead of 3 is not 10 times more effective. In fact, it's usually counterproductive or even less effective. Why? The 3-day loss of the bike or car makes your point very powerfully, but it means in 3 days that you can use the vehicle again as an effective deterrent or lever. If negative reinforcement is necessary, by all means, offer a plan for the person to improve the situation. Claire, for instance, was a bright 16-year-old who was about to be expelled for truancy, poor grades, and fighting with her mother. She was threatening to run away, and her mother had taken away all the money, the use of the telephone, the dating privileges as punishment. But the situation was only getting worse. Here's the plan that was worked out with the mother and daughter. 1 note from school each day saying that she attended all classes, earned Claire's telephone privileges for the day. 4 notes during the week earned 1 weekend date, and 5 earned 2 dates. The mother was very doubtful at first, but the plan worked beyond belief. The lesson was this: when Claire was punished by loss of privileges, she showed no change until a different way of earning the privilege back was offered. 4. One last suggestion. If negative stimulus control doesn't seem to be working, try shaping the absence of the behavior. That is, give positive reinforcement to anything other than the undesired behavior. Karen Pryor, in her book Don't Shoot the Dog, tells how she used this method to modify her mother's behavior on the telephone. Her mother had been, in her youth, a fascinating, witty woman, but when she became an invalid living in a nursing home, the telephone conversations were usually, and sometimes exclusively, concerned with her problems, pain, loneliness, lack of money. Her complaints would turn to tears and tears to accusations. The exchanges became so unpleasant that Pryor tended to duck the phone calls. Pryor decided that there might be a better way. She began concentrating on her own behavior during the calls, deliberately extinguishing the complaints and tears by saying, ah, and and well. Well, her mother complained, but not hanging up. She reinforced anything that was not a complaint. Queries about the children, news from the nursing home, discussions of weather, books, friends. These she responded to with enthusiasm. To Pryor's astonishment, after 20 years of conflict, the proportion of tears and distress to laughter and chatting reversed within 2 months. The youthful, witty, interested mother returned. Is such shaping manipulative? No more than John Wooden's coaching of his players, and no more than the day-by-day methods we all use to influence the behavior of those around us. For all our talk about the merits of love versus punishment, says James Q. Wilson, people are changed by routine interactions in which we convey by word, tone, gesture, and expression our approval or disapproval of the behavior of others. Is guilt a legitimate tool for the motivator? We turn now to one of the most difficult areas in which to find proper balance when deciding which tools to use for motivation, the question of guilt. 2 extreme views exist on this matter. 1, the position that guilt is never valid, that one should never be punished by such negative forcing into doing anything, and 2, the position that guilt is a more effective way of extracting conformity, especially from children. Let's examine a position number 1 first. This view is illustrated in its extreme by those who advocate that we all avoid shoulds. Pop psychologists are forever saying that people are to operate on I cans rather than I shoulds. They can decry the admonition, you should call your mother. It is an ideal with a certain enticing sound to it, that we could live without ever using negative emotions to motivate anyone. But in reality, there is a value in living by certain shoulds, and guilt is in fact a very valid emotion. When we do wrong, we ought to feel guilty. Prompted by that guilt, we can correct the wrong and avoid making the same mistake in the future. But it is all too easy for the leader to use guilt excessively. In the short run, it is both easy and effective, so parents often take the lazy way and regulate their children by this method. For an illustration of the devastating effect on such behavior, I turned to a patient recently in my office. Here is a woman now in her 50s, depressed and lethargic. In fishing to find the reasons she is so unhappy, I discover that she still runs scared because of the manipulative way her mother controlled her when she was a little girl. Here's the way it worked. If she did something to displease her mother, such as sneak off to a movie — it was a rigid home in which many, many things were prohibited — her mother would never get angry. She simply got hurt and would pout for days. I asked my patient if she did such rebellious things often. "Oh, no," she replied. "I couldn't stand the way I felt when I knew I had hurt her." That mother used tears in a cruel way. By pouting and crying, she kept the child's emotions on a string like a puppet, and the residual guilt lingers 40 years later. It is important to distinguish between neurotic guilt and legitimate guilt, as Paul Turnier does in his splendid book Guilt and Grace. Legitimate guilt is that which stems from knowledge that we have erred and which leads to correcting our course. Neurotic guilt is that which lingers long after any corrective measures have been taken, and it is crippling rather than constructive. We need not walk on eggshells with our children for fear of leaving them with lingering guilt, and we should not hide our emotions when our kids disappoint us. The crucial difference is the manipulative parent is that he or she conjures up tears and anger in order to control the child. So the question to ask yourself is this: am I pouting, or am I angry just to teach a child or an employee a lesson? Or is it my genuine emotion? The relationship becomes neurotic and manipulative when we teach our children that mom's or dad's feelings are the most important reason for action. Instead, our aim should be to teach them that there are certain laws of right and wrong in the universe, and that they ought to make choices carefully considering the results. And we will try to avoid the lament, "How could you do such a thing and hurt your mother so?" Tom Edwards, who in addition to being an excellent writer, is also a master teacher of junior high students, makes the distinction this way: our aim is not to control people, but rather to point out consequences and give choices to people. That way, it is not manipulation, but motivation. The proper way to use negative tools for motivation is not an easy question for any of us who are dealing with people. What is the proper balance between negative and positive reinforcement? For now, let us agree that praising should far outweigh scolding, and that in the long run, what we are aiming for in our use of fear and guilt is an alliance to high values rather than fear of our displeasure.